Chapter 131. Parley. Once Princess Alexis was out of the shower, she motioned for Dominic to go in. "You still smell like gunpowder and magic. It's not bad, but you should wash and change out of your armor. The enemy is in no shape to attack again this morning, even if they want to," she insisted. "Yes, Princess. But it's afternoon. Then put your armor back on after you shower. Who knows what that moron Albroles will order by nightfall." Dominic showered and changed, then returned to the strategy room to see the princess staring out the window. "What do we see?" he asked. "There is a messenger with a white flag of parley walking across the north fields. Get ready. We'll take a car to the wall." As they descended the stairs past Marquis Burton's room, they saw him and his sons sitting silently, staring at the casket of his deceased wife. The boys looked like they'd aged a decade in a single night, and the Marquis himself couldn't be called anything but broken. Princess Alexis immediately dismissed asking him to accompany them and left him with his grief. The driver raced across the city, so they were at the north wall when the flag-bearer was still only a little over halfway across the open ground. "What is the process for this? I didn't get to that part of the book," Dominic whispered. "We speak to them from the walls. There is no fighting until they're all the way back to their lines, and the flag is put away out of sight." Alexis replied quietly. The formally dressed nobleman holding the white flag of parley stopped 10 meters from the wall and raised his voice. "Might I ask, to whom I have the honor of speaking?" he called. Alexis nodded for Dominic to answer on her behalf. "Royal Sorcerer Dominic Wavemates on behalf of Her Highness Alexis, 9th Princess of Signia." The nobleman nodded. "Nigel, second son of Viscount Staptontave, greets the princess and her advisor. Last evening, Duke Albroles was most unfortunately lost in battle, along with his entire command retinue. As the ranking noble remaining in the force, I wish to negotiate the peaceful withdrawal of troops from the theater and the collection of the remains of our noble officers." Dominic turned to Alexis, and she nodded, then held up her hand to indicate she would speak. "Lord Nigel, under normal circumstances, the hostile actions of the Dago's army would leave no room for a peaceful withdrawal. However, given the gravity of the loss of Duke Albroles in battle, I will grant your request. But I must ask for our records, which titled nobles were lost in this engagement." The nobleman sighed, and Dominic could see that the events of the morning had worn on him. Duke Albroles, all 5 of his sons, Prince Prescott, Lord General Albroles, plus the barons of Dove, Gaston, Natalia, Dover, and Greenbelt. Dominic noted all that and nodded gravely. Why the Duke had brought all 5 of his sons to the same battlefield was a mystery. Tactically, that was a terrible idea. So, he asked, was there a particular reason that all of the Albroles heirs were gathered on the battlefield? Lord Nigel shook his head and ran his fingers through his tangled black hair. They weren't supposed to be. 3 of his sons were airship captains, and they weren't assigned to the Burton region. But they were all shot down here. The other 2 were brought as witnesses for his intended marriage to the princess after her surrender. The last was barely audible, as if he didn't really want them to hear it. "Ah, yes. That makes sense. We received a letter to that effect," Dominic replied, as Princess Alexis looked like she was going to kill someone. Lord Nigel bowed. "Thank you for your mercy, Your Highness. I will have the cleaners begin their work now." He began to retreat, but Dominic stopped him with one last request. "What method of burial does Dagos prefer for their dead?" He knew that the answer was cremation, but he also knew that he could ask them to burn their own dead to remind them that they had made a tragic mistake in attacking the city of Burton. "If you will allow us to clear our dead, we will perform a proper cremation ceremony before our withdrawal," Lord Nigel offered. Princess Alexis nodded and raised her voice, so she would be heard down the wall. "We will allow you to gather and cremate your dead. But if your force does not withdraw after, we will consider it a complete disregard for noblesse oblige and order our riflemen to target your officers in all future engagements," she announced. That already happened, but it wasn't an open and deliberate thing. Killing the ranking noble was an easy way to victory, but targeting every noble soldier in the ranks would be a disaster for their lineages. "I understand, Your Highness," He replied tightly, then turned and walked away. Not long after he reached the lines and planted the white flag on a pole, keeping it flying to signal the ceasefire, the Dago's soldiers began sorting the battlefield, separating the officers from the enlisted men and the titled nobles from the rest of the officers. The process would take many hours, as there were far more dead than there were living, and the force looked like there was a disease running rampant through them. At some point, they had brought the majority of the soldiers from the south up to join the other forces, and that must have spread whatever illness they had to the rest of the soldiers. But they kept at their work, cleaning the dead and arranging them in piles to be cremated. The funeral pyres lit the night sky, a macabre reminder of the battle's true cost, but by morning, the survivors were packed up and leaving to the north with whatever they could carry. Was it wise to let them clear the battlefield? They will have taken as much of the wealth and magitech as possible back to Dagos with them. One of the city mages asked as Dominic and Alexis returned to the wall to watch the enemy depart. Indeed, but in the minds of the common soldiers, who are unlikely to see a cent of their promised pay from their dead noble masters, we will be the compassionate ones. The royal lady who allowed them a chance to salvage some dignity as they returned home. Alexis replied, and it would crush morale if they were sent against her again. Chapter 132. Missing Marquis Burton. The early morning light dawned over thick black smoke as the cremation piles smoldered, darkening the sky to the point that it was nearly impossible to tell night from day. For the residents of Burton, this was a day that they would never forget. Not just the thick smoke, but the smell that came with it, as the bodies had been doused in thick tar oil to help them burn. The remnants of the Dago's army were in full retreat, not attempting to hold formation, and Dominic wondered how much banditry was going to increase between here and the border. Many would not want to go home and face the results of a lost war, but they couldn't stay in Signia. Even their accent would give them away as foreign soldiers if their face didn't do it first. But that wasn't Dominic's first concern. "What do you mean? The Marquis is missing?" he asked in an even tone that made the guard commander's spine shiver. "Just that, Lord Advisor. This morning, his quarters were empty. His maid is also missing, along with a small amount of his clothing. There were no signs of a struggle, but he cannot be found, and he was not seen leaving the keep," the guard explained. Princess Alexis gave a nod to the royal guard, and they sent a pair of soldiers to search the secret exit tunnel for signs of recent usage. The Marquis was in a delicate mental state, but I hesitate to think that he would have harmed himself. Could it have been more traitors? The guard asked. That is possible, but it is also possible that he has secluded himself for his mental health. The royal guard is joining the search now, but we will need you to bring the eldest son here to stand in his father's place while he is unwell, Dominic insisted. Lord James is going to need a few minutes to prepare. The guard stammered. Dominic gave the guard a grim smile and patted him on the shoulder. I completely understand. But he still has a duty, and unless he's willing to pass his birthright to one of his brothers, he needs to do it. The city guard left the room, and Princess Alexis winked at Dominic. You're getting better at that. Almost like you were born to give orders. Dominic laughed. I suspect I was actually born to dodge the attacks of wooden spoons when I tried to sample dinner before it was ready. I was a true artist as a youth. The royal guard took in the light atmosphere between the two as they waited for the Marquis heir to arrive. The sorcerer and the princess were very well attuned to each other. They might be paladins from the same order as the princess, but she had always been more like a sister to them. With Dominic, it was different, and for a moment, they began to consider that she might be feeling romantic towards something other than a book. However, that was when Dominic took a thin tome down from the strategy room bookshelves and handed it to her. To study while we wait, he offered. Alexis looked confused for a moment. She wasn't interested in the bookkeeping of the Marquis estate. But when she opened the plain leather cover, she found that it was actually a romance story, rebound as if it were one of the record books. There are a dozen more like it hidden on the shelves. I can tell by the paper, Dominic explained. He sat on the sofa to wait, and the princess took the other side, then leaned against him, so she could put her legs up to place the book on. Definitely more than a friendly bond, the royal guards decided. The sight of the princess casually using her advisor as a backrest as she studied a ledger was what greeted James Burton as he walked into his father's strategy office, accompanied by a pair of royal guards. "Your Highness, I believe that you need to read this," the guard insisted. The flat tone made it hard to tell what he thought of the situation, but Dominic was getting better at guessing, based on experience with the royal guard. This was one of the "this is going to be a pain in the ass" flat tones. Princess Alexis popped open the wax seal on the thick envelope addressed to her and began taking out documents. Dominic read the beginning of the first page. Inheritance, transfer of title and deeds. Princess Alexis skimmed through the pages and then got to a handwritten letter at the back. "Your Highness, given my mental state after the untimely passing of my wife and the toll of stress taken by the siege on Burton City, this humble marquis requests the crown grant a living transfer of title to my eldest son James. I have trained him well, he knows the keep and all city business. He will serve the crown well and faithfully in my retirement. Please understand, I cannot continue to rule Burton from the same building where she died. I have taken one personal maid with me, as well as a driver and 2 guards. We will be retired to the capital to spend the remainder of my years in mourning. Your faithful servant, Marquis Burton XXXIV." Princess Alexis got up and closed the romance novel, then placed the documents on the table. "Your father has chosen to retire early and pass the title of Marquis to you. We don't have enough nobles here for a proper ceremony, so it can wait until after the war. But as of today, you will officially take over your father's estates. Everything has been passed to you. If you wish to reward your brothers or anyone else for their duties, that is up to you. I will inform the crown with this afternoon's message," she explained. James Burton, now Marquis Burton the 35th, sighed deeply. "Thank you, Your Majesty. What news do we have today?" "I am somewhat out of the loop, as I was charged with military logistics until just now," the young Marquis replied. Dominic handed him a copy of the morning's messages. "We will catch you up on everything that happened during the battle later. That report is what is happening right now." Chapter 133. Aftermath. The morning was spent going over reports, ordering repairs to the portions of the city that had been bombarded and burned, and cleaning the remainder of the battlefield after the Dago's troops were long gone. There was a surprising amount of military equipment simply abandoned on the battlefield. The artillery had destroyed the transport vehicles, and many of them had never even been opened, with whole loads of supplies still inside when the Burton Defense Force went to collect them for parts. Over 100 vehicles were pulled into the city the first day, all staged near the gates for inspection. Loose supplies, weapons, and the storage devices of the fallen officers were all taken by the survivors. But spare uniforms, blankets, camp supplies, enlisted men's weapons, and much more were discarded as too heavy to carry or too hard to sell once they got home. The uniforms could be stripped of badging and reused in the city, or cut for bandages and rags by the city's residents. The quality was decent, though. So, the consensus was that it would be better to simply dye the blue and yellow uniforms into something more suitable and keep them until they were worn out. The process continued for the next 3 days, until everything was finished, and the city could send out a Magitech dozer to create a deep mass grave to put the now cooled remains of the Dago soldiers in, well past artillery range, in case someone wanted to come visit the grave of their lost family members. "We have a message from the capital," Princess Alexis informed Dominic the morning after the last of the battlefield cleanup was finished. "Oh, only good news, I hope?" Princess Alexis unrolled the message scroll. Strategic update for the royal emplacements. After the crushing defeat at Burton, the 1st, 2nd, and 5th Armored Regiments of the Dago's army are now considered disbanded. Airborne artillery has been deemed a hard counter to armored convoys, and His Majesty is altering our own tactics to prevent a reversal of these events. The Dago's airborne special forces were engaged by the airborne battleships at Burton City and crashed before they could reach their target at the capital. Dropping outside a major target center rendered their primary invasion tactics ineffective, and the implementation of Magitech in the defense of Burton broke the siege lines in only 1 month. The Signia Royal Army has pushed back the invaders, and peace talks are currently underway between the Second Prince and the Regent of Dagos. King Conrad was felled in single combat with Prince Alex. Long live Signia. Dominic read the message 3 times before he was sure that it had really sunk in. The King of Dagos is dead? Their most powerful duke lost all his sons here, and the army has been driven back across the border? Well, it looks like they were waiting for something worth writing a message about. He joked. I guess that means we just have to wait for deployment orders to see where we go next. Princess Alexis agreed. Then I should probably go fix all the rifles from the Noble Sons Regiment. I made them and I've got the spare parts with me. Dominic suggested. The new Marquis Burton frowned. You're a gunsmith? Were you not a royal advisor before the war? Dominic nodded. I was. But I am also an apprentice under the Royal Mastersmith. I excel in the gunsmith's forges. The Royal Guards are quite fond of my pistols, and those are second-rate items that were intended for retail sale, not military use. The mana pistols now hung on the hips of every Royal Guard member, opposite their sword. The blade was still the primary defensive weapon if they were engaged as a group. But if they needed to clear enemies quickly, the pistol was the way to go. James smiled. Some people have all the spotlight on them in life. Others do not, no matter how hard they try. Like my brother Dax. He was always in the shadow of his 2 older brothers, and now that he's injured, General Merlot has taken over his command duties. Dominic hummed curiously. I didn't know that the general was with the regiment. I had assumed that it would be in a command role, but Commander Dax has been our liaison. The Marquis nodded. General Merlot was their training officer, and he wasn't put in a command position when they were deployed. Instead, he was placed as the king's regimental overseer, somewhat akin to a royal advisor, while the younger generation ran things on a day-to-day basis. That made sense to Dominic. The general certainly had the rank to put himself in place as a regimental commander and still consider it a demotion. So having him embedded as an advisor appointed by the king made a lot of sense. I will go see the general after a meeting then. Keeping the regiment properly armed while they are deployed here is of paramount importance, and there simply isn't a better choice. Princess Alexis looked at the stack of paperwork. Advisor, you can go take care of the regiment. I suspect that we might not have long before another Dagos attack begins, and there is no guarantee that they won't target us again. We need those rifles in peak form. She instructed. Understood. I will see you at dinner. Dominic missed the look that the new Marquis gave him as he was leaving, but not the amused clank of metal on metal as the royal guards nudged each other. He gave them a what? Look as he passed, and the guards chuckled. He could try to play innocent, but how many times in the last few weeks had they come into the princess laying on his lap? How many times had she attacked him for trying to feed her pineapple? Come to think of it, why did the kitchen keep agreeing to give Dominic more of the sour fruit, knowing exactly what was going to happen? Chapter 134. Repair and Rearm. Dominic made his way to the barracks where the natural sons were quartered, and knocked at the open door. Gentlemen, I have made time for some smithy duties today. I have my travel tools with me if there isn't one available, and I will get your rifles all tuned up to peak performance. Start with the ones that are not operational, and I will get them working or swapped out. Then we can repair the ones that are mostly functional. The soldiers cheered and led Dominic out of the barracks to the repair shop, which Dominic was quite certain was intended to be a farrier and sword-sharpening shop in the past. It was currently vacant and disused long enough to gather a lot of dust in the corners, but the whole place was still well-stocked. Where has everyone been getting gear fixed? Dominic asked as he loaded the forge with coal. At the shop on the south side. It's a bit of a trip, but it's an artificer shop, so they're good with most things. The weaponsmith in the keep does the swords and armor. General Merlot explained. All right. Bring over the broken ones, and I will see what it is going to take to fix them. I have a few spares already assembled. Though, I assume the regiment has some spares as well. Though, those might all be broken by now. Dominic replied. The general nodded. We had 100 spares when we started. I distributed the last of them this morning. Some of the rifles look easy to fix, but you're the expert. Dominic frowned. Set them out along the wall, and I will inspect them to see what needs to be fixed. I won't try to make them all perfect, just get as many as possible working properly. But I do have one request. There is no torch in here, and I don't have one in my travel kit. Can you go to the shops in town and find someone to sell you one? General, if you can give them a requisition order, that would be best. If not, I will give them money. General Merlot nodded. Of course. I have an officer for that. Give it 30 minutes, and they will find you a torch. Dominic started sorting through the rifles, and found that the most common issue was where in the munitions press and lever. The design didn't have any adjustability in it, and it had never occurred to him that it would need it. But the hinge pin was wearing out, the steel of the trigger guard lever had divots worn in it, and the rounds weren't being pressed properly. So, the round wouldn't load, and the rifle wouldn't fire. He hadn't even finished sorting the rifles when the requisition officer came in with a Magitech torch and an upset-looking worker. I told you to buy one, not steal it from the steamsmith. Dominic joked. I am buying it. He's an artificer, but he wouldn't take a requisition for it. He wants 30 levels of mana core or equivalent in gold. The officer explained. General Merlot nodded and handed the man his payment. The artificer looked terrified when he realized that half the regiment was inside this building and not just a single officer or an accountant. He had miscalculated his attempt to charge a premium price beyond what he would get back from a requisition order. But now Dominic had what he needed, and he lit the torch to solder new parts on the worn bits so that the rifles would cycle again. Dozens of hinge pins were hammered out and replaced, trigger guards were reshaped, munitions presses were adjusted to precisely match barrels, and within 2 hours, Dominic had 50 of the 100 spare rifles cycling flawlessly. Who has a sloppy rifle that is getting close to the ones that stopped loading? It's the easiest issue for me to fix, so bring them to the front. Dominic instructed, giving up on his notions of just getting everyone's rifle working. Nearly everyone raised their weapon, and Dominic sighed. How many rounds do you think that you have put through each of these rifles? They do have a rebuild cycle, but it is possible that the cycle is not nearly long enough for the way that they actually get used, he asked. The soldiers did rough math on their fingers. I'd say about 2,000 on airship defense duty, then another 500 or so when we were hunting mis-dropped paratroopers. Then how many for this? 20 a minute, 8 hours a day for 2 weeks? Then more when things got ugly? A lot anyhow. Dominic nodded. Let's call it another 7,500 for a nice round 10,000 rounds per rifle, on average. That's not bad durability. At some point, even the triggers will be wearing out. I've checked the mechanisms and they look good, but they're also not under major strain. Once those were finished, Dominic fixed or replaced over 100 charging levers, and the Natural Suns were back to full capacity with 50 spare rifles in working order. The last 50 were too badly damaged for a quick repair, so Dominic left them alone and cleaned up his workspace for dinner. Gentlemen, enjoy your refurbished rifles. I have a dinner appointment, and we are expecting orders from the capital. If you need me, come look for me tomorrow. You know where I will be. He instructed. General Merlot gave him a slap on the back, so solid it nearly took Dominic off his feet. Great showing, advisor. Now we're ready to go again. We even restocked all our travel rations from the Dago's vehicles that we captured. Don't worry, we poison tested and cleansed it all before storing it. Every man in the unit has a munition creation core now as well. The artificer, who only takes cash, was good enough to make them for us during the battle. The general explained. Dominic smiled at the battle-worn soldiers. See, all things considered, it's going better than expected. Only when all things were considered, though, because the Natural Suns did number nearly as many men now as Dominic remembered them being when they left. Chapter 135, Redeployed. Dominic returned to the top of the keep and took his usual spot on the sofa. How did the repair mission go? Princess Alexis asked. Good. I've got the whole regiment operational again, with some spare rifles for their next engagement. They put far more rounds through those Magitech rifles than they were ever designed for, but that's my fault. I underestimated what they would be going through. Dominic replied. James Burton looked up from a map of the area. You say that as if you were the one who chose those particular rifles for them. Dominic nodded. I chose the design, I made the rifles, and I made the spare parts that got them going again today. But when I was given the task, I was thinking of something more like the noble riflemen of the officer corps. The young Marquis sighed and ran his hand through his tangled black hair. Nobody expected things to end like this. Magitech is changing everything about warfare. First the rifles, the improved cannons, now airships changing everything about troop deployment. Nothing that I learned as a boy means a damn thing anymore, and now I have to take up where my father left off. He muttered. Dominic got to his feet and poured James a drink from the decanter on the end table. Here, you sound like you need this. Remember, everyone learned things the same way that you did, so everything is new to all the commanders, and they're just making it up as they go. The whole naval blockade tactic we used with the airships? It's just the standard naval blockade technique adapted for 3 dimensions. The same with the riflemen clearing infantry charges and disabling mechanized charges. There was a saying with the guards in the manor I grew up at. No plan survives the first engagement of the war. It's only those who can adapt who live. Dominic spoke slowly and quietly, calming the stressed nobleman. The new Marquis Burton sighed. The royal messenger arrived while you were gone. The royal delegation and the natural sons have been redeployed. His Majesty is unconvinced about the sincerity of the Dago's crown, so I am to be left with only my city guards. Hell, I don't even have half my staff anymore because they turned traitor or were sent to infiltrate the keep. On the bright side, you've already proven that your city can repel a full assault by the Dago's army without suffering a single breach. The Dago's army never set foot in the city when they attacked over the wall. That has to count for something when they consider whether Burton should be a target again. Don't underestimate your city guards. They did a phenomenal job. Dominic informed him sternly, while Princess Alexis smirked at him. She had been trying to talk him down all day, but he just got more worked up with every new message that they got. She gave it 5 minutes before he was going again. Sure enough, not even 10 minutes later, there was a mechanical horse rider at the eastern gate, requesting access to the city. He had information from the king, for the 3rd time today. I will go receive the messenger at the base of the tower. Your Highness, I shall return promptly, James announced, then nearly ran from the room. He's a high-stress person, Dominic noted. He's not doing bad, for a new marquis. Most of them get a transition period to get used to the position, either with a higher-ranking noble looking over their shoulder and giving guidance, or with their parents present. Princess Alexis shrugged. Well, you're here, aren't you? Supervised transition is what we're doing. Probably not as well as we should be. Dominic replied. What sort of advice is that, advisor? Questionable advice. Like my questionable transition training techniques. I'm just making things up here. Dominic joked, while the princess smiled at him in amusement. The sound of the guards snapping to attention alerted the pair that things were not as they seemed, and Dominic quickly got to his feet with his hand on the pistol at his hip. He was trying to look casual, but knew that he was failing miserably when the door opened and the second prince, Prince Alex, stepped into the strategy room. Relax, I'm not a threat, advisor. Princess Alexis stepped over to give her big brother a hug, and the battle mage prince laughed. Good work, little sister. Eleanor is insanely jealous, and she's driving us all insane with requests to hear the story of your battle feats. I tried to tell her that your time here would have been in a boring strategy room, but she insists that she missed an epic battle story. The prince sighed. Alexis laughed. Well, I suppose that we do have one somewhat epic battle story about how the enemy managed to top the wall and send a unit of infiltrators to surround us while we were patrolling the northern front. But I doubt that will be enough to satiate her for long. Prince Alex smiled and sat down in the swivel chair at the desk. Now, I didn't come here only to escape the attention of our youngest sister. Father is calling the princesses all back to the castle for the banquet to officially announce the armistice. The Dago's royal family is in rough shape right now, with the loss of the king and the most powerful duke in the nation. He explained. Alexis smirked at him. Then I suppose it is suiting that you came here to inform me. After all, it was the units under the two of us who were responsible for the majority of this chaos. The prince ruffled her hair. Who said I used a unit? I got news that the king was going to be moving from Albrol's to Kynwyn, so I ambushed his convoy alone before they could react. Between you and me, the whole story of the noble loss in single combat is absolute bullshit. He was 90 years old and intending to turn over the nation the moment that he could find a competent heir. That was supposed to be after the war on Signia was over. Whichever prince or duke could prove themselves would have taken over the nation. How many princes did they lose? Alexis asked. 6 out of 10. But the 4 that are left are the smartest of the lot, so there is some hope that they're not going to cause a fuss at the armistice signing. 2 of them are currently unwilling guests of the crown, after all. Dominic made a mental note of that. The king of Signia hadn't shown any leniency to the invading royals. 7 royals dead, 2 of the surviving 4 captured, and a forced armistice without sending a single regiment across the border. Chapter 136. Attributed Glory. Finally, the prince turned to Dominic. You must be the gunsmith. You've become a living legend in the capital in your absence. Dominic bowed politely in greeting to the prince, but only nodded his head in acceptance of the praise. No, I'm not joking. The daily reports of the natural sons have been the talk of the palace since the siege started. There was great fear that Duke Albroles would manage to take the city and capture the princess, then force her into a marriage contract in order to spare the residents. But with every day that they sent back massively lopsided casualty reports and the city of Burton still held, the gossip got more dramatic. Alex explained. And that is why the youngest princess is so eager to hear more. She's been confined to the palace for a month, hasn't she? Dominic guessed. The prince nodded. It was deemed too dangerous to send her back to the academy until hostilities near the city ended. You should both think of what you're going to ask the king for. You're in for quite the reward for the defense of Burton and the success of the airship plan, which has been attributed entirely to advisor Dominic. How did that come about, anyhow? Princess Alexis began to laugh, and Dominic nervously rubbed the back of his neck. Oh, now I really need to know. Alex continued. You see, the techno-wizards had an idea about making battleships out of airships, but the weight didn't work out. So we negotiated and halved the number of cannons. But that still left no cargo weight for munitions. The solution was to make a Magitech orb to load the cannons, but nobody wanted to take the blame if it didn't work. So I volunteered to take all the blame for wasted resources, and we came up with something functional within a single evening. It worked better than anyone could have anticipated, and even with 8 cannons per side, the flying gunships have had few problems shooting down the enemy. Dominic explained. Ah, the scapegoat theory. Many gamblers will be upset to hear it. They were wagering that you were hiding a secret recipe to try to get journeyman rank. But how did you manage to make a Magitech orb that could load cannons? The mana expenditure must be horrendous, with 8 cannons at a time. No crewman should be able to operate that. He replied. Alexis continued to laugh quietly. That's true. They can't. The techno-wizards went up with the airships. They haven't set foot in the city since the battle started, other than on the airship docks when they resupplied. All of the city defense was done by the mages in Marquis Burton's employ. What level did the Magitech orbs need to be brought to in order to be functional? The prince asked. That's the best part. They are effective from level 1, even without attunement. The first few days, the mages on the airships were sharing 1 orb between 2 of them because they left the extras for the city defenders. Dominic explained. He held up a spare copy, which was still level 1 and not attuned. The prince gave it a greedy stare, and Dominic tossed it to him. Keep that one, I've got another and I know how to make them. He offered. Thanks. I can always use more magical options, especially if they are viable right away, and I don't need to dump resources into them to make them useful. I actually have a create munitions orb at a high enough level to perform the same task, but this one makes an explosive cannonball, right? A second option for me. Yes, the rounds are stone, designed to turn to shrapnel, and they're loaded with black powder. They were exceptionally capable against everything that they faced, except for a few armored vehicles with a plow on the front. Getting past the door-breaching plow was much more difficult, and one was lost to a lucky shot through the viewing window. The other was slowed by shrapnel, but still reached the city gates. The defensive measures held with its reduced momentum, but it might still be better to have solid-shot cannonballs for that sort of situation. Or perhaps a different munition entirely. I don't know enough about munitions to say for certain what the most efficient design for armor penetration would be. There are certainly better options than the stone shot, though. Dominic explained. The second prince nodded. I'm sure there is. But we can leave that up to the other engineers. They will find the answer with some time to research. 5,000 kilometers away, in the Dago's royal palace, a dark-haired young prince stood in the middle of a destroyed throne room. What the hell do you mean? Father refused to name me heir. Did he think that any of those other idiots were competent to lead the nation? Put any of them on the throne, and the noble factions will have a puppet for life. The prince shouted. My prince, the whole nation knows that only Kaizen could be a competent heir. But you know how your father was. He didn't approve of your other proclivities, and he was entirely too soft on the commoners. Once you told him of your intention to reinstitute slavery across the nation, he flatly refused to ever speak your name again, or you would surely have been the crown prince. A blue-robed advisor replied gently, as if trying to calm a wild animal. Prince Kaizen huffed in annoyance. Start gathering all our loyal nobles and call the envoys from Axbridge and Skipple. Dagos won't stand for this insult to our lineage. If Signia wants war to eliminate a royal family, we will show them who the real experts are. Only a true royal is worthy to rule, and those blonde mutts don't deserve the title. Of course, Your Highness. The advisor agreed, before hurrying from the room. The royal guard shared incredulous looks. The prince claimed that only a true royal was fit to lead, but his mother was a commoner girl that the king's eldest son had impregnated just to see if the child would have her beautiful green eyes. He hardly had the standing to call himself a true royal, but he was a useful idiot, and the military would support him if he tried to claim the throne by force. Chapter 137. Return to the capital. Prince Alex focused mana on the Magitech orb, and Dominic saw the item begin to glow more brightly, and the red light began to shift toward a more burgundy shade. What is it that you're doing? He asked. Oh, right. Most people don't see this often. It's a bonus of being a battle mage. One of the techniques that we learn is how to put mana into our Magitech devices, as if it were from a mana core. It only works once per item, and as if we had given it a mana core of our level. But my trade skill core is at level 40, and 40 levels of mana cores into a level 0 Magitech item usually brings it to level 4. Sometimes level 3 if it's inefficient. He explained. Dominic sighed. That was not a trick that he had learned as a blacksmith. Prince Alex chuckled. I wouldn't worry too much about it. You're not yet a journeyman blacksmith. Even if you could learn the technique, it is unlikely you could even get a core to level 2 with this technique. Dominic shrugged, then realized a brilliant way to get information about some obscure questions he had. Well, I suppose I could just eat the mana cores instead, and just cast the spell harder. He joked, and the two royals paled. Don't even joke about that. A berserk dragonkin of your power would be a nightmare, even for me. Plus, you have to be holding hundreds of levels worth of cores. Prince Alex insisted. So, that was what happened if you ate mana cores to level up. Alexis smirked at her older brother. But wouldn't it be a sight? A level 200 berserk dragonkin? They would name a national holiday after the survivors. Dominic hid his laughter behind his sleeve as he struggled to keep a straight face. The prince shook his head. You two have been left unsupervised too long. You're starting to think that your fantasy novel plots are a good idea in real life. Or is it a romance novel? I see that the beds in the other room are pushed together, little sister. Dominic couldn't remember when they did that, but they had been that way for at least the last week. Not that anything inappropriate happened when they both slept clothed and ready for emergencies. Alexis rolled her eyes at her brother. I maintain my profession of undying love for literature. The prince raised one eyebrow. That is not an answer to my question, but I will let it slide this time. Now, did you need to gather anything before we go? Knowing you, you never even unpacked. Dominic and Alexis both looked away with innocent looks, and the prince began to laugh. I was right. You were here over a month, and you didn't even take your spare clothing out of your storage items. You just put the clean laundry back in. Give the guard half an hour to say goodbye to their new friends, and we can get going. Alexis insisted. The guard at the door nodded, and a moment later Dominic heard footsteps headed down the stairs. The Marquis is getting the regiment ready to leave. I brought reinforcements from the reserves, so he's not going to be left undefended once we go. The king assumed that the casualties here were much higher than reported, and you just didn't want to alarm him with the situation. The prince explained. He wasn't wrong. The city guard and militia had lost well over half their numbers. But that was in the last few days of the battle, and the palace might not have received the message yet. The maid came in with food, and Dominic cleansed it out of habit. You know, people are going to start thinking you're paranoid. Prince Alex noted. When we first arrived, infiltrators from Dagos tried to poison both of us with dragonberries. I've done it ever since. Though, I suppose it wouldn't help if they tried the same trick twice, since they're not poison to me. Dominic replied. Yeah, purify doesn't nullify all forms of magic on the food. That's why the poison testers always have to be fully human. If they're not, they might be immune to the poison used. The prince agreed. Now, should we start heading downstairs? I am certain that the Marquis will want to send you off with some fanfare. Some fanfare was a very mild description of what the Marquis had planned. The entire city guard was assembled down the elevated roadway to the eastern gates, and the Natural Sons Regiment was in their parade best, waiting for the royals to arrive, so they could leave. Their mechanical horses had remained unused and undamaged during the entire siege, but today they were polished to like new condition, with fresh drapery for the event. It was magnificent, and Dominic could see that there were citizens lining all the rooftops along the route as well, ready to send off the city's defenders. Once they were in position at the front of the procession, with Dominic following the two royals into a mechanized horse-drawn carriage, the city guard and the reserve regiment that Prince Alex had brought began to play trumpets. That was the signal to move, and the princess opened the curtains so that they could see out and wave at the soldiers. Many of them had seen the princess on her many walks down the wall during the battle, but for most of them, this was their first chance to actually see her. After all, you couldn't tell much, but someone's eyes when they were in full armor. Dominic also had the curtain open, so he could keep himself aware of the situation around them. But the looks he got were much less adoring and more admiring of his accomplishments and magical power. The techno-wizards laughed and waved energetically as Dominic passed their position, and he had to try not to laugh. Most of the glory he was being given was their doing, but they were still happy for him. Or perhaps happy that their device would be spread around the nation. The metallic hooves on first stone, then wooden roadway was a steady drone as they approached the city gates, which were thrown wide open for their victorious departure. It was a strange feeling, knowing that he was headed back to mundane days in the palace forge and the post-war celebrations that would surely follow. But not a bad feeling. Not at all. Chapter 138. Downtime. Compared to the strategy room of the keep, not much changed during the ride back to the palace. 15 minutes into the ride, Princess Alexis had her feet up against the wall and her head on Dominic's leg as she read, while her brother simply shook his head at her and then returned to reading a magical tome. Dominic couldn't help but notice that it wasn't just their names that were similar. Alex and Alexis had inherited the same personality, more interested in books than anything else. They were staying on the main roadway with its stone surface, so it would be a bit longer than the more direct secondary route that they had taken to get to Burton, but Dominic wasn't thinking about the amount of time that it would take them. He had an idea of how to improve the ogre hunting rifles to make them more effective against things that were not ogres. After a few hours of peaceful silence, Prince Alex looked up from his book. "We really are the nerds of the royal family, aren't we?" he asked. Alexis lifted a hand to give him a thumbs up. "Definitely. Can you imagine how annoying it would be if we were trapped in a carriage with Brother Claudius? I swear, that guy gives me the creeps. He just appears in places." The prince laughed. He uses a gem of silent movement and one of diminished presence all the time. He actually enjoys sneaking up on people to see what their reaction is. Dominic chuckled. "I thought that he was hiding in the room somewhere. But maybe I just didn't ever notice him until he started to speak." Alexis nodded toward the snacks on the table in front of them, and Dominic dropped a chocolate in her mouth as Prince Alex laughed. He started that after he was named Crown Prince. People would follow him around everywhere, trying to become his friends, so they could be closer to power in the future. He's incredibly intelligent, gifted in combat, but his people skills were always lacking as a child. So, eventually, he just gave up on dealing with them and started to hide his presence except when he wanted to be noticed for official reasons. He explained. And now it has become his signature ability, and everyone thinks that it's a sign of his extensive combat training. Alexis added with a laugh. Now that was ironic. The rattling of steel-banded wheels on stone roadways was their constant companion as the light faded from the sky, and the regiment pushed forward toward the river crossing, where they planned to camp for the evening. That would put them into the capital early afternoon if they left early, and it would leave everyone properly rested, not exhausted from an overnight rush. The driver pulled them to a stop, and Prince Alex gestured toward the back of the carriage. We should set good tents. It gets cool here by the river overnight. Dominic nodded, then smiled as he realized he hadn't actually set a tent in years. A rain tarp many times, but he never used a proper tent. He didn't like being confined within it when he was sleeping on the ground anyhow. It's a shame we don't have a forge wagon. They're the best sleeping spots. Dominic sighed. How is that? You just bank the forge for the evening, and the whole place remains hot and dry all night. If you worked too late into the night, you can just sleep on the roof with the warm metal under your back instead of the cold ground. Prince Alex frowned, then nodded. I will keep that in mind for future journeys. I'm not the sort who likes that much heat at night, but the roof of the forge wagon doesn't sound too bad. Plus, who would think to look for the prince there when they search tents in the middle of the night? It's an excellent way to avoid assassination attempts. Dominic sighed. Those are getting old. Seriously, more people have tried to kill me in the last 3 months than the last 10 years. Well, I have good news and bad news. The good news is that now that the most aggressive portion of the war is over, you should break that streak. The bad news is that the politics aren't going to get any less annoying than the people who actually tried to kill you. Prince Alex joked. The prince gestured to the staff of the regiment, and they began erecting a large round tent, which made Dominic laugh. You know, if you don't want to be noticed, the huge round tent might not be the best idea. Alex shrugged. Protocol. You know how it is. Unless you want to actually end up married to a princess, you can't sleep in the carriage. I certainly can't, unless I want the most distasteful of rumors to spread. But I also can't sleep in a lesser tent than the officers of the unit. It would be considered an insult to the royal family. So, because they use a tent like this, so do I. However, you can take one of the camp cots inside. It will be more comfortable than the ground. The royal guard will be cycling out through the night, so you don't want to sleep under or on the wagon this time. Dominic vaguely remembered a portion on camp etiquette from his lessons. He was going to have to apologize to Lady Camilla for not listening more intently to the portions on royal protocol. He thought that he knew most of it, but he certainly didn't recall anything about tent sizes. The regiment support staff set the tent up in under 10 minutes, and Dominic tossed his bedroll on the cot by the door, traditionally the guard's position. Except that there were no guards sleeping in the tent today. They had their own. Prince Alex pulled the curtain that separated the front area from the sleeping area, and both settled in for the evening, with separate area barrier spells over themselves. Chapter 139. Dress Your Best. Dominic woke up before first light when he smelled food, and took a moment to brush out his robes before putting them back on for the day. You do have other robes, right? Prince Alex asked. Dominic nodded. These are my general-purpose ones, with a bonus to spell power. I have fancy ones for formal occasions. But if we're going to be at the palace after lunch, I should have time to change before we reach the city. The prince looked him over and shook his head. It's better to change now. Ditch the full armor. You can change back into it with a freshly laundered base layer before the dinner event if they make it military formal. Just take a few minutes to polish up your chest plate and put it over your formal robes. I suspect that there will be many eyes on us as we approach the city, and not many chances to get outside and change clothes. Dominic stripped quickly to change just as Princess Alexis walked in, wearing a bright blue gown with a shining silver chest plate over it. Good, you're changing. Let's see what you've got. For formal wear. Formal wear. She hastily added as her brother gave her a seriously look. But she didn't look away. Dominic laughed and pulled on a clean pair of black uniform pants with suspenders, then put on the best set of black mage robes he had over the top. With a handful of water and a shake of his hair settled back into its usual wavy curls, and Dominic pulled on a clean pair of polished boots. That hair care routine is painful to watch. How do you even make it do that without a brush? It sits the same way every time you do it. Alexis grumbled. Dominic shrugged. It's getting a bit long. I will have to get it cut soon, or it won't do it anymore. The regimental cooks brought over breakfast, oatmeal with honey and dried apple slices, the essentials of stable travel rations. Prince Alex sighed as he stared at the bowl, then passed it to Alexis and took out a round of flatbread and cheese. Oh, not fond of oatmeal? Or is it the apples? Dominic asked. Both. I don't mind fresh apples in pie, but the dried apple slices are a texture nightmare. Dominic laughed as he finished his food and collected the bowls to give back to the staff, who were cleaning as fast as they could. They would have to continue as they moved, washing dishes in the supply wagons while they traveled, but it was far better to get most of them done now. Dominic knew that for most meals, everyone would just supply their own dishes, and perhaps the majority of soldiers did. But they had brought the food to the royal guard. With the carriage back in motion, Dominic settled back into his work, trying to improve the ogre-slaying rifles. He was somewhat limited in the knowledge that he had, but he had a whole set of textbooks on magical engineering with him, which he hadn't finished the lessons for before he left. There were plenty of circuit diagrams in there, and he knew the blueprint for the mana revolver. He didn't need a fully magical bullet, but the concept should be similar to building in a magical buff that surrounded the bullet, instead of just accelerating it. Dominic finally found the information that he needed in the chapter on creating the Magitech core for the torches that most craftsmen used. It wasn't particularly complex, but he could use it to add fire damage to the bullet, and then from there, he could add the circuits that would turn the flaming damage into an explosion, without using an explosive round. That would be incredibly useful when firing into crowded groups of enemies. Now, he just needed to experiment until he could get that to work with either the ogre-slaying rifle or the mana revolver. Explosive magical pistol rounds sounded fun, but the revolver wasn't large, and it was a lot of complex magitech that needed to be added. Perhaps in the handle area? Yes, he could stack them around the trigger and hammer mechanisms, inside hollow grips. That would allow him enough room to put the extra effects onto the mana pistol. The rifle would be infinitely easier, and he would not have to try to miniaturize all the work. But keeping both in mind just made sense from a practical standpoint. What are you even working on? Alexis asked as Dominic continued to sketch patterns in a notebook. Adding explosive rounds to a mana pistol. The princess smiled and nodded, then returned to her novel, but Prince Alex was not going to let that comment slide so easily. You think that you can make the explosion spell work on a pistol? Without adding a spell gem? He asked. Not the spell. At least, not exactly. An explosive effect when the bullet contacts the target. It should be magical fire, the same as the explosion spell, but it should have a level based on the level of the weapon, unlike a spell gem that would need to be leveled separately. I will have to test it to see if it works, but I think that it should. Dominic explained. The prince laughed. Well, if you can make that work, I don't think that you'll have a hard time getting a promotion to journeyman. In fact, your trade skill core might just advance spontaneously. Dominic winked at him. The only way to know that an idea will fail is to try. The idea was originally for the rifles that I made for the natural sons, as there is so much more room to work in a rifle frame. But explosive mana pistols just sound so ridiculously overpowered. Making gunslingers into the new battle mages, one pair of pistols at a time. Prince Alex joked, then motioned for Dominic to show him the designs. Let's see if I can spot any obvious flaws in the design. Chapter 140, Trio of Nerds. Dominic passed the prince's notebook, and Alex began scanning the pages with a trained gaze. Well, it looks like it might possibly be functional. There are no obvious gaps or incompatibilities. But as for making it and getting it to activate, I don't know if it is possible. The prince admitted. A project for when I have spare time, then. But I suppose that the real question should be, what exactly happens when we get back? You mentioned rewards, and I've been gone from the forge quite a while, working as Princess Alexis' advisor. In fact, I'm completely lost as to what my proper duties are at this point, Dominic admitted. Princess Alexis winked at him. Relax, at this point, your duties are basically whatever I say they are. The role of advisor takes precedence over all other duties within the palace, unless you're a titled and landed noble with territory to manage. Though, you likely could become one if you wanted. They're going to give us a lot of credit for the victory as the city's commanders. So you could ask for a title and manor, rare blueprints, and your own workshop with a royal commission. That sort of thing. Technically, you're still an apprentice at the Royal Forge, but once your trade skill course shows the first signs of blue, it will just be a matter of time before you're officially a journeyman. Dominic chuckled. He had been mass-producing magical weapons for some time, and his trade skill core already glowed bright yellow, marking his progress as the 9th or 10th level of apprentice. He wouldn't be surprised if he checked it and found a few streaks of blue already, putting him at the first level of journeyman blacksmith. Even when they were the same weapon, making over 600 magical items in only a few months was a lot of crafting experience. They were nearing the river valley outside the capital when Dominic noticed the first signs of guard stations along the main road. Those weren't there before, and served as a reminder that the war was not technically over until the final armistice papers were signed. Dagos might be in chaos right now, but that didn't mean that whoever had enough power to marshal forces wouldn't try to attack. The sun was reaching its peak when the city came into sight, and the two royals straightened in their seats. They both put their books away, and Dominic took that as a sign to be on his professional best. Their convoy was just the 6 trucks that they had gone to Burton with, but they were now draped with the royal family's banners, so everyone would know that they were a returning victorious force, carrying a member of the royal family. The convoy slowed as it approached the city, and members of the Capital City Guard came out to escort them through the last section, where Dominic could see that a battle had taken place during their absence. It was not right up against the city walls, though. It looked like the capital army had gone out to meet them on the field. The army escorted them to the gates, where a royal entourage was waiting for them to greet the nobles and switch carriages to ones more suitable for the ride into the palace. Dominic activated mage armor under his robes as he got out of the carriage, and then followed the 2 royals through the crowd. They were the ones that everyone had come to see, and Dominic couldn't help but laugh inwardly at the uncomfortable way that Prince Alex shifted when women screamed at him about their undying love, in much more colorful words. If you walk slowly enough, I think she might just throw her panties at you as a claim. Dominic whispered, trying not to move his lips enough for others to read what he was saying. Prince Alex clicked his heel in annoyance, but did look in the screaming woman's direction one more time, just to make sure that she didn't actually do it. Naturally, the young noblewoman took that as a sign that he might be interested and began hysterically giggling with her friends. The 3 of them entered a royal palace carriage, which immediately began moving through the crowd. They sat in silence for a moment, then Princess Alexis began to giggle. You thought that it would end just because you got married? Oh no, dear brother. They will keep at it until you're old and gray, hoping to become a royal concubine to the legendary battle mage of the royal family. She joked. Just you wait. One day, it will be you that has to put up with the lewd wedding proposals. He paused, then frowned. I take that back. You already know what that's like. But it only gets more annoying when I know that I will also have to hear about it from my wife when I get home. Dominic knew that it was only the twins and Eleanor that were still unmarried among this generation of the royals, but somehow, Prince Alex didn't seem like the family sort. How long have you been married? Dominic asked, trying to change the subject. 8 years and 6 annoying brats so far. I swear, that wife of mine spoils them rotten. But what can you do with daughters other than spoil them? He sighed. Don't believe him, he's worse than she is. But he's gone most of the time, thanks to his work, so he only sees them at their most excited. Plus, his wife seems to mysteriously get pregnant every time he comes home, so we all know that he's not spending too much time arguing with her. Princess Alexis added, See what I put up with? You would think that older brothers get more respect, but princesses get away with murder. Dominic chuckled. I think that is inevitable. They just bat their eyelashes and put on the cute face and nobody can stay mad at them. You think I have a cute face? You are just giving her tactical ideas now.